to the History Channel, Channel 9. I am your host, Austin Lord, and today we will be doing a special segment with a World War II expert, Dr. Yuri, and he's actually calling from his cell phone. So say hello, Yuri.
Hello, Mr. Lord. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Yuri, for coming on and visiting our show. Today we'll be exploring the topic of was World War II financially beneficial? My first question to ask you is how much is usually spent to participate in a war?
Well, World War II was a unique war. It was the first war where aerial combat was really widespread. Um, so this led to a very expensive war. Actually, in today's money, by the U.S., $296 billion was spent on the war, which is actually 36% of the country's gross domestic product. Which is a huge number. It's actually 3 times what it was in World War One. So yeah, World War Two is definitely the most expensive war the U.S. had up to that point.
Wow, that's a lot of money. Um, what were the opportunity costs of fighting in the war, the World War II? Um, could the money have been spent on other needs at the time?
Had the U.S. not participated in World War Two, their economy could have changed for the better because they would have focused on helping out their economy instead of just focusing on funding the war. Their money would have been poured into opening up new factories to increase the number of jobs available and other things like this instead of trying to increase weapon ammunition production as such.
So let's look on the bright side. Did the war actually benefit the country at all? Like, did the manufacturing expand at all?
For sure, the amount of manufacturing increased primarily for war purposes, but um, many people actually moved to urban areas in an attempt to get a job in the factories, which actually increased the amount of people working at the time and decreased the unemployment rates. So I would say that is the biggest benefit of the World War II.
Okay, so there were some benefits. Um, did the population shift to any new areas? And did that affect the local economies at all?
World War II actually resulted in one of the largest mass migrations in American history. As many of the men were sent to war, this resulted in the need for industrial workers in the factories. So a lot of people moved in from non-urban areas in the attempt to get a job. Um, Many of these being women whose uh, husbands were off to war. This heavily impacted the American economy. It caused a huge shift towards uh, the industrial industry. The government really converted America's industrial base to produce war goods instead of consumer goods. Um, Although company executives really did resist this idea because they didn't want to become non competitive in their markets.
Were any new lands available for settlement?
No, at this time, no new lands were available for settlement. However, Germany did lose about 20% of their pre World War II land after this war. So, no.
Were political ties cut or established at all?
An alliance was forged between the USA and the Soviet Union in 1941, which was a little bit unexpected because the Soviet Union and US were not on good terms previous to the war. Um, them and the rest of the Allied powers, which included France, Britain, Soviet Union, US, just to name a few, were all against the Axis powers, which included Germany, Italy, and of course Japan.
Do you believe there are any consequences we would have had if we didn't participate in the war? Consider financial and political issues.
Well, I think that if the U.S. didn't participate in the war, the biggest consequence would have been what the Axis powers could have become. Obviously, the U.S. Uh, was a big help in winning the war, along with the Allied powers, and if the Axis powers did win the war, the world could look very different and much worse today.
All right, now what is your standpoint on the United States' participation in World War II? Do you believe that it was necessary, or maybe we wasted too many resources due to our participation?
Well, sometimes you have to spend a little extra to make what you want happen. Um, and I think that it was very necessary for the Allied powers to win the war. And although it did cost a lot, being one of the most expensive wars in U.S. history, um, I think it was beneficial and necessary because if they did not participate in the war, uh, very bad things could have happened. Although financially they did take a little bit of a hit.
All right, Dr. Yuri, I believe that's all the time we have for this news story. So thank you so much for your participation on this show, and have a great day.
Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure.